Welcome to Studio Continent Channel, Continent Media Group. I'm Oksana Davyda, and my guest today is Glen Grant, Mr. Glen Grant, who is a defense expert, who is with Baltic Security Foundation, diplomat, and great patriot of Ukraine. Good evening. Nice to see you again, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mr. Grant, last time when we were having our program, you were very concerned about safety of Ukrainian soldiers, and I remember your slogan, which you were advertising very well: all lives matter and every life matters. And I think we should talk a little bit more about that subject, because I want to quote what you just said recently. And I think you were making your notes because of a new Minister of Defense in Ukraine happened. And as you said, the need for physical support is growing. The ministry is not coping at all, and the aid is not sufficient to allow troops to fight properly. And I think I understand your concern, because we do experience a lot of difficult kind of problems with supply, with bringing everything what each soldier needs. And I think you have some special insight, so please share it with us.
Yeah, I mean it's a complex problem that stems from several basic things that don't work. But let's go to the front line first and then come back to that. I mean, at the front line, the fact is that a lot of the soldiers have not got the equipment that they need. I'm not talking about the wonderful stuff that comes from abroad. I'm talking more often about the small things that actually you need to fight. Now, agreed, some of those are weapons, air defense weapons against the helicopters that are being used against them a lot. Down south especially, and anti-tank weapons. I mean, if you're an infantryman and you come up against an armored vehicle, then if you haven't got an anti-tank weapon, then basically you're in deep trouble. You're probably dead. And so, you know, we do need anti-tank weapons and handheld air defense weapons from abroad. But both of those can be made in Ukraine. And anti-tank weapons are made in Ukraine, but not in the numbers that are required. And in a year and a half, the Ukrainian government still hasn't really gripped this problem. And I read today an article on Patusov's website, censor.net, and it was just talking about one of the attacks that the Russians were claiming was a glory for them, but actually was a Ukraine glory. But a tank went forward, and there were 4 armored vehicles behind the tank, and none of those vehicles contained an anti-tank weapon. So basically, there was only one gun at the front that was capable of hitting a tank. So if they'd have been attacked by 3 or 4 tanks at the same time, they'd have been in deep trouble. So anti-tank weapons and air defense weapons, they are fundamental. But then we come down to all the small things. Night sights. If you give night sights to the Ukrainian army, they will move a lot quicker because they'll fight at night. And the Russians are poorly equipped in this regard. Okay, they have some drones that have got infrared, but you know, night sights allow infantry soldiers to really open up the battlefield 24 hours a day in a way that the Russians can't. Also, they just need a lot more what are lovingly called wedding drones, which are those small ones that are used for taking pictures of weddings, because infantry survive on those. I mean, they're almost like ammunition now, and every few soldiers need one of those. Then also there's handheld radios. I mean, radios are lost because soldiers, you know, they fall over, they break them. A soldier carrying one dies and you don't see him again. So there's a steady requirement for the handheld radios, and they don't really want to buy the Chinese ones. But that's what ends up being bought when the system doesn't actually buy them in bulk and buy them with the required encryption, security encryption in them, because nobody wants to use a handheld radio without encryption, because you're just telling people what you're doing and how you are and things like this. And then there's also other small weapons like grenade launchers, because if you're in a trench and the enemy is in a trench 60, 70 meters away from you, a direct fire rifle which fires in a straight line is often of no use unless you get out of your trench and go forward and actually, point your rifle at the person, which means you're in a 50% chance of dying when you do that. Whereas a grenade launcher, you can throw the grenade, that it fires it 50, 60 meters, and you can drop it into the trench on the other side. You may need 2 or 3 to get the range right, but you can still do that, which gives you, it's a better weapon for that. I mean, and they have no flamethrowers at all. I mean, flamethrowers are a wonderful weapon for trench clearing. I mean, we used them in both world wars, but it's like they've been forgotten. Here we are going back to a World War type of fighting, but without the weapons that they had in those days. So then you come to the problem of straightforward logistics. Yes, people have got uniforms back in the store, but soldiers are given 2 uniforms. When they've ripped one on barbed wire, or they've lost it because something's gone wrong, they've fallen over and it's torn and it's wet, there's no method for bringing forward more uniforms, more webbing and equipment, more magazines for firing. All these small things they need, and the system is just not geared to this fundamental support of the soldier in the front line. So what's happening is the civilians and the support systems, thankfully in US, UK, and most European countries, are actually searching for, and providing these small things that actually governments should be doing, that the Ukrainian government should be doing themselves. Now, hopefully with a new minister, there will be some active thinking about how do we change the logistics system and the processes, so that actually if a soldier loses his helmet, which they do, because you're throwing yourself around in the mud and artillery and everything else, if you lose your helmet, you should be able to demand another one instantly from someone who is not more than 600 meters behind you, not have to actually ask a volunteer to try and buy you one, which is what's happening at the moment, which is a bizarre situation. And I mean, the last minister, Reznikov, came up with this line of we've got the uniforms and they're in the store. Hey, great. Uniforms in store don't help. Uniforms on soldiers and equipment on soldiers is what's needed. And if we equip the frontline soldiers better, especially with things like night sights, they will be able to fight better. There will be fewer casualties, and the whole system will move in a much, much better and more efficient way. And the soldiers will be happier as well if they know that they're not, worrying about losing something or not being able to get a new radio or batteries or things like this, not having to wait for them.
Yes, sir. I absolutely agree with you when you mention the ministry is not coping at all, because you're right. We did see a lot of problems which we're not supposed to see with previous minister Reznikov, and it's not just him; it's the whole Ministry of Defense. And we have that strange thing we experiencing, because from one hand, of course, government supposed to supply everything for each soldier, because when soldier goes to war, he has to feel that support from the government. But what we see, even on the Facebook, on mass media, we see thousands posts from soldiers, from families who raising money for little simple things like you mentioned, helmets, night vision, even those drones, and many other things. And it's kind of strange, because family not supposed to do that. Soldiers not supposed to ask, please raise money, I need a drone, I need this and that. And I know when families send their son or husband or brother to the front line, they have to be sure they're going to be equipped in everything is what is needed right now. But somehow that huge corruption, that terrible corruption, it was just messing up this idea of victory, because soldiers cannot fight properly if they are busy with such things they're not supposed to do at all. Right?
I mean, it's not only corruption. It's not only corruption. I mean, you've got this sort of stupidity and inefficiency, which also is in there, and a lot of that is because people have been chosen for jobs in the past because of their friendship, not because of their loyalty, not because of their ability. So we don't have the best people in many of the places that we should do, and that ranges not just in the Ministry of Defence, but in the military as well. And then there's the other thing, which is that, of course, the Russian factor, that there are people still in the system who are supporting Russia. And I mean, we're seeing it that the SBU are now becoming more efficient at actually catching these people, but still we don't seem to have pulled anybody out of the Ministry of Defence. So we've still got a lot of people in the Ministry of Defence who've been there since the pro-Russia days. Who are still in, and not just in the Ministry of Defence, but in other ministries as well. So there's still not been a real purge and a real attempt to actually to catch the as I would call them, the delayers, the people who spend their time trying to actually make sure that nothing actually works properly. And there are obviously some of those in there who are still doing that. Who find any excuse to not deliver what is actually required.
And in addition to technical problems with equipment, I want to share with you things my friends who are on the front line asked me to share, because actually that video which was displayed with that problem already gone from even Facebook or YouTube, and it was interesting subject about 47 Mechanical Brigade and commander, who is a colonel. His name is Mr. Pavli. So what he was doing, it's exactly what you're saying. He was using high qualified, high educated guys who was going through 6 months educational course as operators, anti-tank complex. So it's a really, really very highly educated, intelligent guys who spent a long time to be prepared for that position. But Commander Colonel Pavli, he was sending them like an infantry guy, like I can say like war meat, just on the front line. So their education, their skills, everything was coming to zero, because they could not use their skills and they could not fight in the way they're supposed to fight and be more efficient. So, and actually it was a message from guys from that mechanical brigade, and they were talking about it. So I don't know what the final moment in this discussion, in this problem, but guys were trying to bring attention to it's exactly what you're talking about, not sufficient, not right way to command, and not right way to direct soldiers in a way it's supposed to be done. It's another problem. It's probably goes from that, I don't know, bad education or just Soviet rules in the army.
It's a whole combination of things. I mean, there's still people who believe that the commanders who believe that as a commander they have the divine right of kings, and that is one thing. And that tends to be the weaker the commander, the more that they actually pull that divine right upon themselves. And then there are some who I'm afraid are just plain nasty, and don't actually care about their people at all. But in a lot of cases, it's that the there's been almost no proper selection for who will be a brigade commander or who will be a battalion commander. And I was talking to one of the generals when I was in Kiev 3 weeks ago, and he said they're now having problems actually getting people to be brigade commanders and battalion commanders. And my comment was, it doesn't surprise me if you don't actually have a training course for them.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the challenges is, who wants to be a brigade commander or battalion commander and take responsibility for lives if you've not actually been trained how to do this, neither having the military training nor the leadership training. And without either of those two, you are confidence poor. So you go back to, fall back onto divine right of kings and bullying as being your only method of actually doing things. And I mean, this lack of understanding of what people have got to be able to do, I hear all the time from, not just 47 Brigade, but from other brigades as well, where people, my friends, are just saying, the brigade commander or the odd battalion commander are simply not up to the job. And this is a problem, because if you create this situation where soldiers don't have the right weapons and equipment to do the business, you end up with more casualties. More casualties means you have to bring in constantly more and more people who are unskilled, because casualties, means that you're losing good people that are in the learning process. And this cycle has to be broken somehow. And the only way, in my view, to break it is to slow down the death rate, so that you don't need so many people, so that people stay longer in the job, have more time to learn the job, all right, even in battle, and possibly then be able to pull out some of the more experienced ones to train other people better. Because that cycle is, in a year and a half, there has been no attempt to break that cycle. And actually, it's got worse, if anything, because as we've lost some good people, then lesser people are in command. And that is not a good thing. And of course, they've expanded. You expand the army to 100 brigades, and that means that the quality level across is much lower. I mean, you look at Great Britain, where I think we've got about 8 brigades or 9, combat brigades. Well, that to choose 8 people from the best of the British Army is not that difficult. We all know who they are by the time they're lieutenants. Usually, he is going to be a brigade commander. You can feel it. But when you've got to find brigade commanders for 100 brigades, and you don't train them, then it becomes difficult. And you have no system. You have no HR system to actually to judge how good people are. No criteria for judging how good they are. Ergo, selection systems based upon friendship, which doesn't work.
Actually, sir, you already started to answer my next question I'm supposed to ask you, and thank you for that. You mentioned about system of British Army, which you know very well. You know it from inside out, and you have big experience. Also, again, it's a question from my friends from frontline, because they are thinking about future of Ukrainian Army, and they're thinking how to change things, how to rebuild, how to make some renaissance in that case. And the question was, which formula, which model of army structure would be better for Ukraine? Like you mentioned, maybe we can borrow something from British Army, maybe something from Swiss Army, because Swiss Army is famous in Europe by discipline.
And it's not been fighting, dear. Yes, Swiss Army is not there. Don't get anybody who gets these ideas about borrowing other people's. The most appropriate is the army that will allow you to have the best army within the budget.
Okay.
Because it's all to do with money. It's not about anything else.
So you think British experience will fit Ukrainian system?
No, I don't think. I don't think any experience will fit Ukraine. Ukraine has to have a system that meets the requirements that Ukraine has within the budget, within the money. Because if you don't do it within the money, you end up with, as other countries have done, like Germany did in the past, far too many soldiers and not enough money. So nobody gets any training. So there is a line with this, and that line, you've got to have in the system a certain amount of professionals. And the reason you have to have professionals is not necessarily because they're going to do your fighting for you, but if you have good professionals, you can expand your army quickly. And those professionals can train. I'm just going to add a small bit here, which is that the lessons learned from First and Second World War about expanding units were given to the general staff about a year and a half ago. This is how you expand units. This is a lesson learned from World War I and II. There were 3 ways of expanding a unit. They chose the worst one, which is everything from new. The best way is to take a brigade and to split it in half. And so you have the commander has half and the deputy commander has half. And then you split the people, the good people, half and half. You split the sergeant majors and the best NCOs half and half. And then you give them new soldiers. And because the structure, the battle structure is still there from the old brigade, both brigades can develop very, very quickly because they still have commanders in that new brigade. They have commanders, they have deputy commanders who know each other. So you've got trust at the command level, you've got experience at the command level, and then you bring in new boys. That is the way to actually to expand from 1 brigade to 2 brigades. And it works because they did it in First and Second World War. What you don't do is create a brigade from nothing, because there's no trust, there's no battle experience, there's no anything. And we've seen what happens when they put 23 Brigade onto the front line. It took casualties and it took a beating because it didn't have that battle experience and a commander who knows what he's doing with the people and knows the people, their limitations, their strengths. So when you do that, that's what happens. Now, what you've got to have in the future army is you've got to have a really solid core of professionals, highly skilled professionals. Now, maybe that's 70, 80,000, maybe it's 100,000. And then when you expand, you've got to have reserves who are also trained already, even if it's only 30% trained or 40% trained. So you need reserve units like we used to have in Great Britain and we got rid of. You have foolishly, you have reserve units that are part-time, but they can come in and out. So, in a brigade area, the brigade would also have maybe 1 or 2 reserve battalions with a couple of professionals in there to make sure the quality line is there. And everybody else just does part-time soldiering when they want to, once a month, twice a month, 5 times a year, 6 times a year. But they do come, they do things, and they know exactly where they've got to go when the war starts. They know who they're fighting with and everything. So you're going to have a balance of those types of units, because you can't afford as a country to have too many professionals. It's too expensive. It eats the money, which means that you don't have enough money to then bring the reserves in, which is what Finland is doing to a large degree. So they have a core of professionals, then the reserves are trained in conscription, and then do some reserve training. In my view, not enough, but they do some. But that other money can be spent on equipment and vehicles and for the expanded army. So you've got to have some sort of balance like that, and you've got to look at the budget, and you mustn't have too much of anything or it eats the money.
Yes, exactly.
You eat the money, it's not there. You can only spend money once, which, this is something that is very, very quickly forgotten and not understood by most military, is that if you spend the money on something you don't actually need, and here lies a problem with the rear area of the Ukrainian armed forces, that there are lots and lots and lots of people who are not 100% involved in the war. and whose job could be done by a civilian, actually, in a lot of cases, could be done by a volunteer. And you need to strip out 200,000 of those because they're eating money. And a lot of them are senior ranks as well. They're like colonels and lieutenant colonels who are just eating government money unnecessarily. So you have to be efficient. You have to treat defense like a business in that respect. You can't keep stock if you're not going to sell it. Is the typical business comment.
Yes, talking about experience, probably you're right. Ukrainian army is most experienced army right now because what we're going through, and 1.5 years on war means something for experience. But from other hand, I still think Ukrainian army needs a lot of help into building new structure of army, inside army, for peaceful time, for wartime, because we need to get rid of that bureaucracy, terrible bureaucracy, ton of paperwork, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, and guys are busy with totally useless things they're not supposed to do. And I hope we're gonna get rid of those old-fashioned colonels, even generals and other officers who still work on Soviet formula of how army is supposed to work and how they supposed to use free labor. You know, we have that famous joke from Soviet times. I just love it because Russian Soviet army, whatever commander, he's telling his soldiers to dig a trench, and they asking him for how long that trench is supposed to be. So he's saying, okay, well, don't ask me stupid question. Dig from here till Friday. So we don't want that.
No, you're right. But I mean, this is to make changes like that. Remember that changes like that are nothing to do with the military; they're political. And you have to have political will to make changes, and that political decision making that we're going to make changes, and that political decision making and will is not there at the moment. And I mean, partly because people keep coming up with this argument that during war is not the time to make changes. But no, during war is exactly the time to make changes so that you are efficient to fight the war. Which is exactly what we've done. Other countries have done in the past. Is you make the change so that you can actually deliver what is required in wartime. And there are a lot of things that have not been kept in balance with the Ukrainian armed forces, and partly that's because of the failure of MOD, but I think also partly because it's a failure of imagination of the political class, who have not really engaged in. They've not engaged in the war, to be honest. There's lots of nice words, but actually sitting down and saying, right, what are we going to do to win? Well, nobody that I know of has been doing that, because if they were doing that, then the front line would have been better supplied, and we'd have heard changes in the words, political wording, changes in the military wording. People would talk differently, because it would be clear that everything is geared towards it. They would not be wasting money on building roads that don't need building.
Exactly.
Repairing roads, repairing buildings that we don't need to repair at the moment. And that tells us that there is still something wrong.
Sir, you're mind reader. I supposed to ask you my next question about political will, and you're already talking about it. So, as you know, probably your friend, Mr. Boris Johnson, published a great article recently in it was The Spectator, I believe. So he was talking very emotionally, and we published that article, we translated, so it was very, very popular, and it still is. And he's talking very emotionally about 20,000 amputated limbs, guys with amputated limbs, about a big need of different things Ukrainian army experience right now. And he's still talking about, like, okay, Ukraine needs 200 ATACMS, and United States has 1,000, and he's so emotional. He's using that expression what the hell we are waiting for? And he's absolutely right, because till now we still don't see that strategical decision, what to do, how to win this war. And it looks like, sorry to say, our White House administration is still very impotent in this decision, because we still don't understand why they are so slow, why they don't give Ukraine what Ukraine needs, and why they so weak in their decision making. Because we understand, longer that war lasts, more casualties, more damage for Ukraine. And we understand, if that help would be concentrated in first months of this war, we would be rebuilding Ukraine right now. And right.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, it even draws me to the question of whether there is one of the advisors in the White House who's actually working for Russia.
Absolutely, yes.
And
no doubt.
I mean, but because people have been bought in just every country, no question about it. Politicians have been bought in every country in the world, not just in Europe, in the world, and that is becoming clear. It becomes more and more clear, and not just politicians, but in some cases, security services have been infiltrated as well. I mean, Russia has been working at this extremely strongly and cleverly for 20 odd years, maybe longer, probably even longer, because they've always had a base of thinking about how to beat the West, probably since Stalin's time, and we're now just seeing the reaping the benefits of that Russian. I think, hybrid war is the right word for it. Yeah. Which is not about little green men, but is about state capture without going to war. And by goodness, they've done Russia's done a good job of it. And we still, in many ways, we still haven't woken up to it. There are still lots of politicians who possibly themselves are, supporting Russia, who've not actually come up clearly and said anything. This is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, but more recently, in the last weeks, some of the European politicians are now beginning to actually to be more blunt about this, but we're not seeing that bluntness, that positiveness, and that need for clarity coming out of the White House at the moment, and that is extremely worrying. Because as you say, every day that the White House drags its feet on things, another 50 or 100 Ukrainian men die, and and that's not funny at all.
And like my last question, I want to put together a few things. Recently, we see a bunch of Republican senators pushing Biden to change things. He is not doing what he's supposed to do, and they're talking about the same stuff about ATACMS. And we have good example from British help, Storm Shadow, what they did recently. So we do have perfect examples how fast and how well Ukrainian army will do what it's supposed to be done with right support. And it's, in the beginning, we could hide it. We could kind of play to think what they mean, what they plan about White House. And it was like, a lot of excuse, I'm not sure, or we want to save face of Putin, or we don't want to escalate. So it was kind of okay to discuss about it last year, but right now it's a totally different time. And main question, we see what United Nations talking, how they talk about Russia. They actually don't talk about Russian terroristic regime at all. We see how G20 reacts on Russian aggression. Nobody even talk about it. And general picture, for me personally, looks very strange, because everybody like to talk what Ukraine should do, what they not supposed to do, how they do their counterattack without actually supply, which they need, how they making many mistakes, or what is good but what's wrong. So everybody is talking about Ukraine, and exactly as Biden in the beginning, he even wrote an article, what we're not going to do for Ukraine. So why those accents are so misplaced? Because I think all words supposed to talk only about Russian aggression, about dictator Putin, his dictatorship state and terroristic state of Russia. And after each bombing, which happens almost every night in Ukraine, and now we have even NATO countries building bomb shelters instead to stand up and say, hello, guys, maybe we should rethink what we're doing. Maybe we should find a way to stop Putin, not to blame Ukraine for different mistakes. What's going on? Why we see that?
I think you've got to just go back to my last answer, which is that there are too many people who are still bought by Russia. Then I think that we've got the worst generation of politicians in Europe that we've had in history, maybe even in America. I won't generally, and it's this, you know, in peacetime you choose one type of politician, you know, and when wartime comes, you need another sort of politician. And unfortunately, we don't have that. We don't have that pressure in Europe and America that we're also at war at the moment to change those politicians, to select different people. And so the people that have been selected in the past for peacetime are now, in many cases, totally out of their depth. Yeah, they're frightened. They're not up to it. They don't have the experience or the capacity to understand what this all means. And probably don't have the imagination to understand what happens if Ukraine loses. They don't want to think about it, so they'd rather have business as usual, which is what we've had. Come on, we've had that for the last 50, 60 years. Let's keep business as usual. You know, failure of imagination, failure to read history. Bought by Russia, sorry, and let's be blunt, the Russian strategic communications is far, far better than anything the West is delivering at the moment. Not just better, but it's in more volume, and it's more aggressive, and it's more structured in the way that it comes over with consistent lies, consistent half lies. All of these things that could be perhaps true. And so you've got countries like India, Brazil, where people just buy into those lies because, let's be blunt, half the world hates America. Half the world hates America because America is successful. And America is successful, and people hate success because all those politicians, it shows people up. Why is the industry? Why is the dynamism in America? And they don't like it, so they hate America because they. But then they all want their children to go to school there, and they all want to move there. It's this bizarre sort of thing that is in the world at the moment. So what we have at the moment lining up is Ukraine and you could call it the pro-Ukraine people, and on the other side, it's not anti-Ukraine, it's anti-US, and Russia is playing to that audience as well. And unfortunately, in the West, we still have stupid people who just don't have the right values and don't understand that supporting Ukraine is supporting ourselves. And on that note.
Yeah. That present administration, White House, and specifically Biden, I call them administration and present of war, because war started with their help, I think, and they did nothing almost to prevent it. They did nothing in the first couple months to stop it, because it's like in medicine. If you take right medication in the right dosage, immediately 5 days and you're healed. But when you're gonna drop those pills, like every 3 days, one pill, you still gonna digest them, but it's not gonna work.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's I call it the toothache syndrome. You know, when you got a low level toothache, you just won't go
Yes,
to the dentist, and that's where we are at the moment. Nobody wants to go to the dentist because they're
yes,
frightened of the drill.
yes, yes.
And there we
Well,
are.
I still hope we have to look in a bright future. We still
Yeah, we're
hope,
going to win. We are going to win. It's just
yes,
bloody, and we're losing friends in the process. And you know, and my last note is I still do not see, even with changes of minister, I still do not see that the Ukrainian government is taking the war seriously.
no, no,
Don't see it.
unfortunately,
Don't see
no,
it.
yes. But I have good news. Maybe you did not notice yet that new Minister of Defense, he's changing all old stuff from his predecessor.
Except
So
the deputy minister.
yeah,
Except the
he's
general.
firing them. So, but it still doesn't look right to me.
Let's
So it
wait and
was
see. Let's wait and see. Next discussion will be after this change. When he's made it, then I come back and we talk about it and talk
okay.
about what the changes are and if they are real or not.
Okay. And especially after this this week, we're gonna see some. I hope good things happen in Washington, and maybe after that we're gonna see much more clear position of both sides, and maybe some good news are on the way. So let's keep finger crossed and hope. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
It was very nice to listen to you, like always, and to listen to your advices and your analysis and your smart analytics as usually. Thank you, sir. Thank you, our viewers. Oksana Davyda, Glen Grant, defense expert and big friend of Ukraine, were today with us in the studio. Glory to Ukraine.
Yeah, glory to heroes.
Slava Ukraini.
And I hope they stay safe. We need them.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. See you soon. In couple